critique partner is an absolute angel, and she bought me this bouquet because I finished my manuscript, or at least I finished the first draft of my manuscript, and she read it, and yeah, we got to talking about it, and that made me realize that I need to make a video about the comparison between my first draft of my first manuscript and my first draft of my second manuscript, because these are two entirely different beasts. Chatting with my critique partner about these books really helped me to kind of see that I've made some big changes as a writer in this first year. I've written 2 books in not a calendar year, but since September of 2024. Now we're in August of 2025. So I've written 2 books in 1 year. And yeah, I want to sit down and chat a little bit about that. I made a chart to compare the 2 first drafts, and I think that that's kind of, it's pretty informative for me at least. I don't know how interesting this will be for you, but for me it was informative and interesting and thought-provoking. By the way, if you're new here on this relatively new channel, I'm Zinnia, and I like to read and write. And yeah, I just finished a book, and we're going to talk about those here in just a second. Let's move over to the living room. And oh, if you've been here a while, though, you've probably noticed that this is not the same kitchen. I am back in Vietnam, but the horrendous orange cabinets are no more because we moved to a new apartment. In fact, a lot of things are new. New apartment, new motorbike, new robot vacuum named Cinderella Bot, and we love her. But that makes me the evil stepmother, so I don't know how I feel about that. But also, I am recently unemployed. I was working part-time before, and while I was visiting my family in Kansas, I was unceremoniously laid off with no notice and no severance and no nothing. But that's kind of just how it goes sometimes, working overseas, and you don't have the same kind of protections, or even if you do, they kind of ignore labor laws if you're a foreigner. It's just unfortunate. But this is not a woe is me video. Like, I realized that losing your job for a lot of people would be like devastating and maybe even spell disaster. But I'm incredibly, incredibly lucky, and if I'm unemployed temporarily, we're going to be okay. And this is kind of an opportunity for me to explore some creative avenues a little bit. I'm teaching online as I have been for years. If I can kind of boost that a little bit, then maybe I just don't need to get like an outside of the home job, which would be great, honestly. So this is an opportunity maybe to like throw myself into my writing and content creation and other creative pursuits, and also really kind of focus on my kids a little bit more. Yeah, I'm trying to look at this as maybe as a more net positive thing than a net negative thing. But yeah, anyway, let's get back to what this video is actually about. Let's compare these 2 manuscripts. Also, just look at these beautiful flowers. There is a fire in my manuscript as part of the plot, and she captured that beautifully. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. But yeah, let's hop over to the living room. It's a little bit more comfy, and we will look at this chart that I made. I think it's interesting, and we'll see what you think about it. Like I said, I made a little chart type of thing to compare my first manuscript that I wrote last year, end of last year, and the manuscript that I've just finished. So let's look at a little bit. So I wasn't sure exactly what to put. I wasn't sure exactly what were going to be the key features, but as I started working on it, I realized that there are a lot of differences and there are a lot of things to look at here. So first off, the genre. I pitched my first manuscript as psychological horror, and although it does have a lot of Gothic elements, maybe I could have pitched it as an urban Gothic. There aren't as many agents who specifically represent Gothic, so horror is kind of a bigger, broader category. It's easier for querying, I think. My second manuscript, Project Nest, is a dystopian Southern Gothic, and I think it's fair to say that it's a Southern Gothic because it has a lot of elements of societal decay and corruption, as well as just a setting in the American South. And that's the next part here, is the settings are wildly, vastly different. My first manuscript is set in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, in the present day. Very easy for me to kind of visualize and describe. And my second manuscript is set in the United States, which is home for me, but I'm not from North Carolina or Louisiana, and those are the primary settings. I'm a Kansas girl through and through. And the year for this book is 2061. So I had to think a lot about future technologies and the future political climate, because that's really what the book is centered on. So there was a lot of sort of brainstorming that went into it before. I wouldn't call it plotting or planning. It was just like thinking about some details that I wanted to include. Next, we have the number of POVs, the number of POV characters. And for Tetrophobic, the first manuscript, there were 5. And I think maybe there were too many. And that was part of the problem that I ran into when I was querying the book. One of the agents that rejected my full manuscript actually said that she preferred a single POV for horror. And I get it. Maybe that's what she was trying to gently point out, that I just had too many POVs. And then my second manuscript, Project Nest, just one POV, a single one. And that honestly felt, I don't know, it felt easier to write in a lot of ways, but there were times when I was wishing I could share information outside of her own experience, and I couldn't do it. So maybe that's because it's a first person. Both of these books have included a first person POV. In Tetrophobic, I had first person and third person, close third person. So that may have been another issue with the POV situation. But yeah, they're both also past tense. So yeah, writing first person single POV was a different experience for me. I think my next book, I'm toying with which POV I should use and which yeah. I'm kind of toying with the idea of writing. I think it's almost certainly going to be past tense because I much prefer past tense as a reader also, but I'm wondering if I should write in first person or third person. Anyway, that's something I'll deal with later. And let's get back to my actual chart here. Number of characters for each manuscript. So the first manuscript, we had 11 named characters who came up really regularly throughout the narrative. And again, I feel like it was a bit too much. And in my second manuscript, there were only 8 named characters who came up regularly. And we're talking about a much longer book also. That's the next one. I think it logically follows that we need to talk about the word count here. My first manuscript was right around 67,000 words. It was a bit underwritten. It was a bit sparse. By the time I queried it on like draft 3 or 4, it was 85K. So I wrote in a lot of extra content to kind of bulk it up and fill in some missing parts there. But my second manuscript is clocking in at a whopping 96,800. I have to round that up to 97,000, but I don't want to because I just know that for the genre, it's just far too long. So that's something I'm going to have to work on in the second draft. And it follows on that there would be fewer chapters in the first manuscript, and there were 28 chapters in the first draft of the first manuscript and 43 in the first draft of the second manuscript. And the word count of those chapters was surprisingly comparable. I guess the math works out for that to be that way, that there are more words and more chapters, therefore it's going to be a similar chapter length.
But yeah, I think that just over 2K words per chapter isn't wrong. I'm not sure. Maybe they're a little bit short, or there's sometimes when I feel like the chapter is dragging on too much, and that I need to have fewer scenes per chapter, maybe. I don't know. That's something I need to look at in second draft mode. So the time frame for completion, this is one where there's a huge difference between these two. So my first manuscript, I wrote it in 41 days, which I guess people who've done like Nano are like, yeah, I've done that before too. Well, this was my very first book, and I had done zero planning and no, yeah, I was just I had an idea at work, and I went home and I started writing chapter one on September 21st, 2024. And I finished it on Halloween, which felt very auspicious and like it felt right to finish a horror novel on Halloween. But like I said, it was underwritten, it was underdeveloped, and it needed a lot of editing that maybe it didn't fully get. So writing it quickly maybe wasn't the best way to go about it. My second manuscript, Project Nest, I wrote it in 183 days. Now, to be fair to myself here, I started writing it right as I was also querying my first manuscript and just getting started with the querying process. So I wasn't really that locked in. But by the end of July here, when I was finishing Act Three and really pushing to get it done, I was fully committed in writing a lot each day. So that I think I could have written it a little bit quicker, but there were times where I was busy with other things or just not as committed to writing every single day. So we'll see how long it takes me to write the third manuscript, but I have 2 months. I got into my Notion the other day and I set up a plan for how I'm going to deal with writing the third manuscript and then editing the second manuscript. Basically, what I think I'm going to do is start the brainstorming and perhaps plotting process. We'll see what I end up doing. Start that process next week. We'll be kind of toward the end of August here, and then we'll go end of August, all of September, all of October, so that boom, November 1st. I'm not really doing Nano, of course, but for November, I'm planning to be editing my second manuscript, Project Nest here. So we'll see if that all works out. I'm not sure. As for the approach for these books, by approach I mean is like how I came at it from a planning and thought perspective. My first manuscript, there was basically no plotting at all. I had like a little whisper of a synopsis that I had in my notes app on my phone, but I was like purely pantsing this book, and it shows, I think, that there was not a lot of structure to it. And it had just a lot of issues that now looking back on it, I'm like, oh, should have done something about that. So maybe some planning could have helped me a little bit to avoid some of those problems. Um, Not to say that you can't pants a wonderful novel, because I think it can be done. But yeah, I just didn't have enough experience to be able to pull that off. And so the approach for my second novel wasn't so different from the first, honestly. My synopsis was a bit more fleshed out, but I stopped looking at it toward like when I was in Act One, and then I just pantsed it mostly. And I did some general research about like the locations, like I mentioned about locations, and did some like brainstorming for future technologies and looking at like what are some major political things that I want to highlight. But there was no chapter by chapter plotting. There was no beat sheet. And toward the end of Act Three, I really honed in on the idea of nonlinear writing, and that helped me to finish it. So I'd say that's one of the approaches. Although I'm hoping that I can just write the next manuscript start to finish and not run into that sort of roadblock situation. And maybe some plotting could help. Like I said, we'll see. Feedback on these manuscripts was also very different, I would say. Um, Before I queried the book, the only people that had read it as like beta readers were people who are friends, like people I know. Although I did choose my most bookish friends, and of course they gave like generally good remarks and no like really critical feedback. Although my mom people are always like, your mom's going to love your work. No, my mom is maybe my harshest critic because she said she read it multiple times, couldn't wrap her head around the ending, didn't really like some parts of it, and she let me know that. So I will continue to let her read my work if she agrees. She said she doesn't want to read the second manuscript because of the political aspect, but we'll come back to that probably in another video. Um, and then my critique partner read the book after I queried it. And she said that it felt like two different books smashed together, and there was like a serious lack of cohesion, and that it needed a lot more editing than I gave it, which fair, very fair and very true. So that was actually helpful feedback that I wish I'd gotten before I queried it. So take that as a warning for yourself, or take that as some kind of cautionary tale. The feedback for the second manuscript, there's a lot less of it because the only person who's read it is my critique partner. I haven't even read the full manuscript. She's the only one that's like read it as a reader. And she said she feels like it's a lot more structured than the first manuscript, despite the fact that I didn't plot it. There are some parts, of course, that need to be condensed because the word count is insane and it really does drag at some places, and I know that. She also had some really specific questions about the motivations of some characters in some really specific parts of the story, which is so helpful. That's something I'll definitely come back and look at in draft 2. She also questioned the allegiance of one of the minor characters, and it's funny that she did because as I was writing Act 3, I kind of flipped and changed my mind and was like, no, this character is actually good. And I had her as being kind of an antagonist, or like a minor antagonist, as I was writing Act 1 and Act 2. So I definitely need to revisit that. But that's kind of what I have here. I feel that I have grown so much as a writer between these first two manuscripts, and I've learned so much, and I'm really excited to take what I've learned here and put that into writing my third manuscript, and also into the editing process of my second manuscript. So I feel like there's a lot of value to be had in just comparing like the metrics of your writing and looking at these kinds of things and seeing what you can glean from that. But yeah, I highly recommend doing this. I hope it wasn't too boring. Um, and yeah, you should expect some more videos coming from me now that I'm back home, and also now that I'm less employed than before. I've mentioned that I have come up with a writing challenge that I want to share with all of you. I've been working on the details of how to make that easy for everybody. And yeah, I'm hoping that I'll have a video up about that soon, and that you'll all be interested in that idea. And yeah, you should also look out for other content, just general pre-writing stuff, getting into the third manuscript, and also what I've been doing to kind of decompress and recombobulate myself post travel and post finishing the second manuscript, and kind of refilling that well as I get ready to jump into a new project. But yeah, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you. Drop me a green emoji in the comments. Green for new beginnings, I guess. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.